Welcome to episode 2, season 3 of the Sports Corner podcast. My name is Nick, joined by my great friend Steven. We are here tonight to take a look at some of the conferences in college football as we are gearing up, getting closer to the new college football season. Tonight we're going to look at teams in conferences in the Pac12 and the ACC. And we're excited for you to be here, and we're excited to do that. If you're joining us live on Twitch, you get to be a part of the conversation. Twitch.tv/PastorNick86 live every Monday night starting at 9 o'clock Eastern. However, if you can't catch us live, you can watch the video on demand replay on YouTube at youtube.com/NickCan86. And of course, you can always find us on your favorite podcast app, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, all of those fun things. And as always, if you leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and give us a review, we will read that live on the air. So keep your eyes open for that. Get your word out across, and we're excited for that. Well, without further ado, Steven, my friend, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
Doing good. Hey, you sound better in my ears already from week 1 to week 2. We work magic on this podcast. You know what I'm saying?
That's true. And we just figure out that we're both kind of tech idiots sometimes.
Yeah, we maybe forget that you were probably picking up audio from your less quality microphone, and that's okay. No big deal. But man, how has your week been?
It's been good. I mean, it's Monday, so...
Yep.
Sure.
Are the Olympics over, by the way?
They ended yesterday. The United States, big winners. I know we're not doing winners, losers, but we won the gold medal count and the medal count.
Oh, yeah, 39 gold medals to China's 38. Haha, take that, go America. For a total of 113 to China's total of 88.
It really
so I just want to point out, I don't think he's listening right now, but maybe at some point my good friend King Cal, our Australian buddy, will take a listen to this podcast. And what I want him to know, because he tried to give me a little bit of lip the other day for America counting all of our medals instead of just gold medal in the medal count thing. Hey, doesn't matter. We won it all. No, take that, King.
It was foreshadowing.
Yeah, it was.
Or something.
Came back to take it all. So very nice. So Olympics are over. That was some great distraction a little bit. I have to admit there are some sports now and that have been in the Olympics the last couple of years that really just throw me off.
Mike Collier WX cheered. X100.
Thanks, Mike, for the 100 bits, buddy. Appreciate that so very much.
I have good news for you.
Yeah.
There is football every weekend from here until the Super Bowl.
Yes, that is a good thing.
It is.
I like a lot of sports. I know you like even more sports than I like.
That's true.
But there is no sports like football, man. There's something magical about being able to sit down on a Saturday or a Sunday or, thankfully, almost any other day of the week, because we like to get as much money of it out of it as we can, to watch football, man. It's the best time of the year.
Yes, and we are very much college football fans here.
We are, yeah.
I watch the NFL, but mostly for fantasy purposes.
Mm-hmm. Hey, speaking of which, I haven't got to talk to you about this yet, but I've actually have an invitation from a friendly podcast, the Political Hack podcast. You've heard me talk about them before, about potentially joining, at least one of us joining a fantasy league over there, and maybe doing like a joint podcast, a joint stream of some sort while we do the draft.
Sure.
So we'll be in discussion about that, but maybe keep your eyes tuned out of that. And we've got a couple of other friends that are some real fantasy gurus that I'd like to maybe pick their brain throughout the course of this this podcast as well. But Steven, I think you had some winners maybe, or some other things outside of the show notes that you wanted to mention. So take some time here and mention those for us. Let me make you. No, you're already big. Okay.
Thank you for that.
Yep.
I've been trying to lose weight, but just call me out.
It is what it is.
I'm just kidding. So yeah, we're doing a little different show today. Like Nick said, we're going to preview. Normally, we would start with winners, losers, and helmet stickers. So I will give a winner a helmet sticker, a jersey patch, whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
Luka Doncic got paid today. 5 years, $207 million.
Tell us about this athlete. Tell us what he plays. What does he do? Why should people care about this?
Luka is the star player for the Dallas Mavericks. So
okay,
back from your old stomping grounds there.
Yep.
I'm trying to pull it up, and apparently doesn't want to. I'm trying to figure out how old he is, because he is
He's not
a very rich person to be a very young person. So apparently it's not going to pull up. Oh, there we go. He is 22 years old.
I just can't hardly imagine making that much money. You know what I'm saying? At that age, like what would you do with it?
I don't know. I mean, that's a great question.
Yeah,
that's a lot of money to try to spend.
Yeah.
But congratulations to him.
Let me make it clear. I would absolutely find a way to do that, right? Like, I'd find a way to spend that money.
Well, here's the thing. With 200, I've done the math, and you can spend that much money in a contract for a year. But I don't know how you keep spending that much money every year.
Yeah.
And I say that, I mean, I would save a lot, personally. But a lot of these people go broke. And it's just amazing to me.
Yep. Impressive stuff. Hey, speaking of which, USA men, after their tough start in the Olympics, they won gold.
They did.
Basketball won gold, I think, for like the 200th time in a row or something like that.
Yeah, they played poor Japan in the final. I didn't think that was going to be fair.
Kind of rough. Not quite so fair for them for sure. Okay,
they tried.
Well, they did. They were right there. They made it to the gold game. So hey, that's better. That's
true.
A lot of other teams potentially.
They did get a silver medal for that.
They did. All right. Anything else you want to mention before we jump into the notes that I see you're previewing, spying on my notes a little bit there?
I'm actually not looking at your notes. I have it pulled up. I'm not looking at yours. I'm looking at mine. No, I'm ready. Let's do this thing.
All right. Milldog, thank you so much for the 100 bits. Yeah, sorry, buddy. I just turned off the text to speech because I thought someone might try to throw a little shout out for their team in there. But I'll read it for you anyway because for you deserve it. Said, sorry for the interruption, but go Dogs. We're going to win it all this year. Nick, I love you, buddy. Steven, hook 'em horns, but mostly go Dogs. Thank you for the 100 bits. If you are, again, listening to this via podcast or watching the VOD and you're wondering why we keep interrupting and stopping like that, it's because we do this live on Twitch. We'd love for you to come be a part of the conversation. And in so doing, you might get a little bit of shout out on the podcast. And certainly you can see the text there if you're watching it along the side and get to be a part of what's going on. And speaking of that, what's going on tonight is that we are breaking down two of the Power 5 conferences in the NCAA. We are going to be talking about first the Pac12, and let me give you a little bit of rundown of kind of what that will look like. We're going to talk about some of the big games in the Pac12. We're going to talk about our favorites looking at the season, maybe a dark horse contender, look at some of the Heisman favorites from the conference, then also pick the conference champion. And then if there are any other interesting notes that maybe didn't fit into any of those other categories that we want to mention about the team, we'll go ahead and mention those things in that time slot as well. And so with that in mind, Steven, do you want to start us off with some of the Pac-12, what you have as maybe some of their big games?
Sounds good. So I opened with UCLA LSU. That is at the Rose Bowl this year. I looked today. The over-under for that game is stupid high. So that's actually UCLA's second game. So we'll see if they knock the rust off first before they roll in there to the Rose Bowl to face off against the Ogres LSU Tigers.
Yeah. I also mentioned that game as a key game to watch for out of conference, and I kind of found 3 out of conference games that I thought were interesting this year. And I did want to point out that UCLA's other out of conference games are Hawaii and Fresno State. So at least kudos to them for scheduling one good team to really give them a challenge. And I think that could be a good challenge to see what UCLA is going to be able to do this year.
Yeah. My second one was Stanford, Kansas State.
Okay.
Which is just a barn burner of a matchup.
Right.
And it's at Jerry World. So all you Cowboys fans, go tune in to Stanford and K-State, who is somehow going to end up being the odd man out in this Big 12 reshuffle.
They probably will be, unfortunately. Probably don't deserve to be the odd man out, but they probably will be. For out-of-conference games, I had a couple of other interesting ones. I had Ohio State versus Oregon. Yes. That's an early season game. I think that's going to be a huge tell of what Oregon's going to do this year. Also, we're not talking about them this week. We'll maybe mention this game again a little bit later, but also a good tell of what Ohio State will be able to do this year. Mm-hmm. And then I also have Washington versus Michigan. Now, both that Ohio State and Oregon game and the Washington-Michigan game both take place on September 11th. So those games happen on the same day. The Ohio State-Oregon game is the early game, and then the Washington-Michigan is primetime. And so that's going to be some fun early season football going on right there. And so that'll be interesting to watch how these Pac-12 teams match up against some teams, power teams in other conferences, both the SEC and, of course, here we see the Big Ten.
Yeah, I have a in-conference matchup that same day. It is the first ever Pac-12 After Dark game. We have Stanford against USC.
Like first ever of the year?
I believe this is they have kicked off their own Pac-12 After Dark.
Oh, like it's officially like
yes,
a licensing.
Like we've all called it that.
Okay,
yeah.
okay. I was like, we've used this term for like 3 years now. What are you talking about?
Yes, we have. But this is the first official Pac-12 After Dark.
And who's playing in that game?
It's USC and Stanford. So it'll be interesting to see how that works.
Sure.
Early season matchup there. We'll get to find out a little bit about the Pac-12 there and see who's making a run at that title game.
You have any other in-conference matchups that you wanted to mention right there?
I highlighted Oregon and Washington, November 6th.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's going to be a big one to decide that Pac-12 North battle. I think you have some notes on Washington, so I won't go too into detail there. But that one is definitely interesting. A little later in the year, the Pac-12 title game is December 3rd. So not a whole lot of big conference games left after that for Oregon. That's kind of their final hurdle.
Yeah, I had that exact same matchup written in my notes. It's November 6th. And in my opinion, by that time, we'll have seen enough and know what's coming up enough to say that game almost certainly is going to determine who wins the North Division of that conference. I also have highlighted in the similar way to determine the South winner, that matchup between Arizona and USC, which is also on November 6th. And kind of for that same reason, I just think that whoever happens to win that matchup right there is most likely going to be your South Division winner and play the winner of that Oregon-Washington matchup. So those are the games that we're looking to keep an eye on. I can't help but notice that there were more out-of-conference games that I'm interested in than there were in-conference games, which happens. I mean, and there is a reason for that.
Yeah. Well, there's also a reason we're covering them first, right? I mean,
exactly.
This conference is struggling, without a doubt. Mm-hmm. So I'll save some of that for later. But,
I think we probably have some of the same notes written down later. We don't compare notes, chat. Just so you know, we rarely will compare. Sometimes when we get into helmet stickers and that, we might shoot each other, hey, I'm taking this very obvious one, just so we're not claiming the same one. But usually we don't compare notes. So when there's some overlap, it's because we either read the same article or obviously it's just a very clear thing. All right, so what about
Ohio State week 1? Oh, that's not week 1.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
What about your favorites, okay?
My favorites, okay. I started with Oregon. So my top 4, I have Oregon, USC, Washington, Stanford.
Okay.
That's kind of where I landed, personally.
Okay. So, yeah, for my favorites, in the North, I have Oregon and Washington as really the only two teams that are even worth watching or entertaining. And I think Washington, especially because this is their head coach, Jimmy Lake, technically his second year. But what did the Pac-12 play, like 4 games last year, 5 games? I mean, they played a really.
They tried to play 6.
It didn't happen. I think his record last year was like 3-1 or something like that. Don't quote me on that, but I think they only got a couple of games in. So this will be like his first real year coaching.
Yeah, and he lost his defensive coordinator. Pete Kwiatkowski went to Texas in the offseason. So it'll be interesting to see how he does, as a first-year head coach, but also losing his longtime defensive coordinator.
Right. And then Oregon, I think, is just Oregon. They've won 3 straight Pac-12 championships, or 2 straight, going for 3 maybe. I've got that written somewhere else. So definitely worth watching them as well. And then in the South, I have USC like you do, but instead of Stanford, I have Utah as the next team with the best chance of winning in the South. But we've seen that both of those programs, especially Utah, but also USC in recent years, have a tendency to collapse. So, let's see what happens there. But I think those are my 2 favorites coming out of the South and coming out of the North.
Yeah, definitely be interesting. Utah got that transfer quarterback Charlie Brewer from the Baylor Bears. Um, he threw 28 picks while he was at Baylor, so
Probably threw
that's
a lot of
something.
passes at Baylor though too.
That's fair.
Hmm.
My dark horses, I
Okay.
have I put Stanford maybe
Okay. Okay.
and Arizona State.
Okay.
I'm just not believing in anybody other than Oregon or USC. I just don't see it. I know Arizona State has brought back a lot of firepower.
Hmm.
If you listened to us a couple years ago, we were not Herm Edwards
Mm-mm.
fans.
Not on the Fighting Herms.
And I still am not. I know he's done better than expected, but again, better than expected doesn't mean a whole lot to me personally. I don't see it. I don't understand uh, the hype there.
Yeah.
I mean, the quarterback's good, and I'll mention him later. But other than that, I just
Right.
don't see them week in, week out being able to keep up with Oregon or USC.
Yeah, makes sense. I also have Arizona State. Some of the same reasons you just mentioned. They returned nearly everyone from last year's team. I think they have the most returning players and starters in the Pac-12, so that always helps. They do have a large depth at their running back position, so in a league that I don't know. Like they're kind of a league without a clear identity to me. They were more of that pass happy a couple of years ago, especially with Mike Leach in the league. But they're not quite bruiser. They're not quite, the full spread like they used to be. But having that stable of running backs will help keep a team fresh going in. Then they have some good receivers that are coming in from or returning, I should say, but also a few that are coming in as new bloods. And so if SC or Utah fall apart, then they can potentially make a run. And then my other dark horse is actually UCLA. Just because you think Chip Kelly, maybe this is, he's had a couple of winning seasons. If you can count last year, I put an asterisk by that, especially for the Pac-12 playing as few games as they did. But he does have a new play caller that came in last year but didn't get to have practice time. So I think that really hindered what they were trying to do offensively. So if they can get things turned around, if things go their way favorably, maybe they make a dark run for it, but I don't anticipate it for sure.
Yeah, I mean it's possible, but I think the shine has worn off Chip Kelly over the last couple of years. I mean that hire was really intriguing going into things, but he's just not gotten it going there at all.
No, he just hasn't picked up that traction. And honestly, it kind of became clear year one that it wasn't going to happen. And I think people are just like, give him time, give him time. And, we're kind of seeing, although he certainly had much more hype and I think much more expectation than someone like Frost at Nebraska, but we're kind of seeing some similar results of this just isn't panning out. When do we pull the plug? And that could be this year.
No doubt.
All
Give
right.
me your first Heisman contender.
All right, so obviously, I think the first one that we got to talk about is Keaton Slovis. He is the
Hmm.
quarterback at USC. This is his third year to start. I remember watching him come in, I think due to injury to some of the guys before him a
Yeah,
couple of
JT
years
Daniels.
ago. Yeah. So this is his third year to start. He's was good back then. He's just gotten a little bit better each year. He has 47 touchdown passes with 16 interceptions and a 70% completion rating. So I just think in a league where it seems like every conference gets at least a little bit of representation in the Heisman hype, especially as the season goes on. Maybe not necessarily when it comes time to actually fly them out to New York, but as the season goes on, they try to really give a little bit of love to every conference. And I think in a conference that might be void of some really special players, Keaton is a standout for sure. So I would put him as number one. And then I would put Jayden Daniels, who I think you'll probably mention as well, quarterback at Arizona State, another 3-year starter. He has 22 touchdowns versus only 3 interceptions over the last 2 seasons, and also averages just under 7 yards per carry on the ground. So he's also a mobile threat. And I think if there's going to be anyone from the Pac-12 that manages to sneak it out, it's going to be one of those two guys.
Yeah, Jaden Daniels is kind of the guy I'm looking at. If Arizona State's going to make that run,
Mm-hmm.
it's got to come from him. I mean, this is the guy who can really do it with his arm and with his legs. He ran for 33 carries, 223 yards, 5 touchdowns, 6.8 yards per carry for the quarterback position. That's not too shabby. And a guy that really can, those we see that a lot out in the Pac-12. Those dual threat guys can really change games, and it's not something you see every game. Like you mentioned, you have a lot of that pass happy. So maybe that's how Arizona State does sneak in. They throw something different. at the opponents, and Jayden Daniels maybe can capitalize on that and make a run to New York. Slovis, obviously, you mentioned he's a year removed from throwing for 30 touchdowns, or I guess 2 years removed now. Struggled a little bit last year in the interception department. 17 touchdowns, only 7 picks. But just to throw another name in the ring there, you mentioned UCLA. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, another long-term starter. He has 40 touchdowns to 20 career interceptions. Again, another guy that hasn't really put it all together yet. But if Chip Kelly's going to make that jump, it's going to come on the back of Dorian Thompson-Robinson.
And I feel like Chip Kelly, somewhere inside of him, has the potential to pull that kind of talent out of a player who's already talented. So,
and this is a guy that was probably his most highly recruit, at least in a long time. So It's time for him to get that rolling. All right, so it's time to pick.
Getting down to it, let's talk about conference champions.
Yeah, who you got?
So Oregon is obviously the safe pick. They have won 3 in a row, but here I'll put the asterisk out there. They lost 16 players from last year's roster. That's the most in the conference. Oregon's a safe pick, but I do think that they're not as big of a shoo-in as they have been in the past. So with that, I'll say that USC probably has the most favorable schedule to get there. Their toughest matchups are either preceded by a fairly easy matchup, for example, Colorado before Utah, or an open date, such as they have an open date before they play Notre Dame later in the season. So I know that Notre Dame game won't necessarily factor into the conference discussion, but still, like everything that they're doing is just really preceded for them to be in a good spot, to make a splash. And I say that, if they go out there and they can win that Notre Dame game, that's going to fire them up to finish the season strong, because they do have a couple of, conference games that'll be important, that if they know they're out of the national championship picture, that they might not care as much about. So their worst stretch, however, is Arizona State, followed by 2 in-state rivals, if you can call them that, with Cal and UCLA late in November. And so, like I was just trying to mention, they'll either be like steamrolling by that point or melting down by that point. So if they're in steamrolling mode, I don't think that 3-game stretch is going to matter to them. And as people in the chat are saying, USC probably going to be the best team coming out, and it's really going to depend on what Oregon can do with their run game and some other things. What do you think?
I'm rolling with Oregon. I hear you. I get it. But I don't like Clay Helton. He's just not my guy. This is a guy, he's 45-23 in his career at USC, which is his whole career. He was 5-1 last year, but again, that comes with a huge asterisk. He was 8-5 in 19, 5-7 in 2018. Probably should have been fired in 2018. Not sure how he made it, but he's still there. He brought in Todd Orlando, and former Texas defense coordinator, and I have seen firsthand what a Todd Orlando defense looks like. And there's no way that guy wins you the big game.
Okay.
He just time and again makes questionable decisions that leads to big plays. And Oregon is a team that feeds off big plays, creates their own big plays, and doesn't need any given to them. And I think that the USC will give them big plays in that matchup. So I like Oregon.
Okay, makes sense. I mean, again, I think that is a safe bet. All right, we probably have some of the same interesting notes that we need to mention about the Pac-10 before moving on to the ACC. But let me hear, what do you have for interesting notes that we might not have mentioned already?
Well, I got a question for you.
Okay.
Can you name the last Pac-12 national champion?
Oh, of course I can.
Mm-hmm.
Are you ready for it?
Uh-huh.
It is the 2004 USC team.
It is. Do you know the last time one Pac-12 team played for the national championship?
Yes, I also know that. To play for a national championship would have been Oregon in 2014.
That's 7 years removed.
7 years. How about to even make the playoffs, though? Was
2016 and with Washington. Yeah, I mean, this is a conference that is just stuck in the mud and not going anywhere.
That's the longest drought, by the way, of winning a national championship in the entire Power 5 conference. I can't say this with certainty, although I think it has to be true, right? That's also got to be the longest drought without a playoff appearance and without a national championship appearance, right?
I would imagine so.
I mean, Clemson's won them, so ACC is represented. Oklahoma's gotten there and embarrassed themselves, so Big 12's at least represented getting there and all that.
Ohio State.
So yeah, it's got to be.
Yeah.
That's a huge drought. Pac-12 has a new commissioner. His name is George Kilivkiff.
Sure.
I
like it.
And my big question, one of the interesting notes that I want to put out is with some fresh blood in there, is he going to be maybe willing to do a little headhunting, poaching from the Big 12 that's in a little bit of disarray? So I think that'll be something to keep an eye out as well. Not making an impact this season, obviously, but are they going to maybe see some expanding in the Pac-12 soon? Interesting to think about.
I think they have to.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Let's move to the ACC. So again,
ACC.
we will start with the big games, and I will let you lead us off.
All right. Big games. I only really mention one that's at a conference, although there are many that are good ones. In fact, someone in our chat mentioned one earlier that I think you probably have written down, so I'll let you handle that one. So my big one is Miami versus Alabama early in the season, September 4th. That's week 1. And so that's going to be interesting to watch because I think Miami they're in a position where they've got to say, are we going to be a dominant team or not? And whereas I don't expect them to probably beat Alabama, they need to come out and at least take a swing, right? Bloody your nose.
Can you give me do you know what the line is there?
Oh, gosh. It's got to be Alabama by like 30?
Not that bad. 18.
Okay. 18.
But
okay.
An 18-point favorite in a big profile matchup is not where you want to be.
Yeah. I'll just go ahead and mention my other big games. These are both in conference. So here's my opinion on the ACC, and actually Milldog in our chat is spoiling it a little bit because he said watch out for North Carolina. In my opinion, the fun of watching the ACC this year is going to be on watching whether or not North Carolina can put out a quality product throughout the entire season as opposed to just half the season, which we've seen Mac Brown start to do, right? He's moving that program in the positive direction. So 2 big games that I want to watch is an early season matchup of theirs, UNC versus Virginia Tech on the 3rd of September. And then I want to see what they do in the late season matchup, UNC versus Miami on October 16th. I think those are going to be 2 really fun games to watch to see how UNC is progressing and getting better through the season as opposed to maybe stuttering and falling off.
Absolutely. I have 2 more out-of-conference games. I have no in-conference games, which to me just proves how poor the ACC is top to bottom.
It's worse conference play than the Pac-12, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean
if we were starting worst conference out there, we probably should have started here, and not because, like, obviously they have Clemson, so their best team is better than the Pac-12's best team. There's a very real chance that a ACC team will make not only the playoffs, but make it to the national championship game, whereas I feel very less likely about the Pac-12. But overall, week-to-week conference play, Pac-12 is probably putting on better matchups than the ACC.
Absolutely. I mean, your 2 best teams don't play, which is just not good for business. And really, once you get past those 2 teams, and we'll get into that in a minute, there's nothing. So I have 3 out-of-conference games. I have Georgia-Clemson. That is the premier matchup of week 1 in college football. I believe, 2 teams that will no doubt be in the conversation for the playoff coming into the year, and 2 teams that have been there year in, year out. And to get that week 1, to see Clemson finally put on the big boy pants and go play somebody is fun to see. And so, I think that'll be a fun matchup. I think that, both of them have quarterbacks that they're kind of breaking in. I know Jayden Daniels has experience being in, with USC, but coming off that injury, he played a little bit last year and looked pretty good. We'll see if he can take that next step. I have Florida State Notre Dame. That is on September 5th. It's a Sunday night game. Before we kick off NFL season, we do get Sunday night football. And I think that'll be fun. Let's see. Is
Notre Dame not technically in them for
football? Or is they are.
Basketball?
Yes, they are back to playing independent in football this year.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because they're weird and they do whatever they want, and it makes no sense to me. But Notre Dame, Florida State, we'll see if Notre Dame, has all the hype again. We'll see if Florida State takes that next step. They've kind of flirted with disaster and maybe breaking through, and let's see which corner they decide to turn. And then my final one, it's not really a premier matchup, but local flavor here, Pittsburgh and Tennessee in week 2 on 9/11. Pittsburgh is kind of a dark horse favorite, and I'll get into that in a little bit as well. But, the Josh Heupel era starts with a barn burner with Bowling Green, and then they get to host Pitt in week 2, and we'll see kind of how that goes for both those teams. A Pitt team trying to break back into that top echelon in the ACC, and a UT team that's just trying to find any kind of positive momentum.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that leads us into kind of our favorites for the conference. I'll go ahead and jump us off there. In the Atlantic Division, it's Clemson's to somehow lose. And barring injury or COVID outbreak or,
they would have to quit football, and they still might
quitting football.
They still might get the conference nod.
To have a little bit more of content than just saying Clemson and moving on, because I feel like as a podcast we need to give a little bit more than that. I will say that North Carolina State has been making strides at getting better as a team, but with that said, that won't be enough to overcome their schedule and Clemson's dominance. But if I had to say someone else other than Clemson to look out for, it would be Clemson getting COVID and North Carolina State clicking on every cylinder throughout the season. In the Coastal,
it could happen.
It could happen. In the Coastal, I think we're down to a matchup between North Carolina and Miami. Both of those teams, I think, could be... They'll be the funnest thing to watch in that conference to see what they're able to do. I think the winner of that matchup between the two will win the Coastal Division and get the privilege of losing to Clemson in the conference game, which we'll talk about, I guess, in more detail here in a minute.
Yeah, so my favorites, I have number 1, Clemson, number 2, UNC, number 3, the rest of the conference.
Yeah.
There's no point in giving them any real time. I mean, I agree. Good podcast it would be to go through and really play up one of these teams. It's just not going to happen.
No, unfortunately not.
Even if North Carolina doesn't get there for their side, it doesn't really matter who goes into that game against Clemson.
Yeah.
I mean, it has not been even remotely close. So I just don't see how anybody but Clemson comes out victorious in that game. But there are some dark horses.
Yep, we both have. I only have one, and it's on your list as well.
Okay, I do have 2.
Okay.
I will. I'll let you go first.
All right, so I'll take Pitt. You can tell me what I missed about Pitt and why else you have them on there. But Pitt, I have as a dark horse because of that exact thing you were just mentioning when they have an early season matchup against the University of Tennessee. And if they somehow manage to get that win against SEC Tennessee, which I'm sorry, my Tennessee fan base that's listening to this, let's not pretend like that's not within the realm of possibility. Then it could give them a little bit of boost in confidence that they take then into conference play. And they do get Miami and UNC at home and late in the season. So if they're figuring things out and maybe they catch those teams at the right time on their home field, I don't foresee it. I certainly wouldn't predict it. I wouldn't tell you to go, put the college tuition on it in Vegas. But if you're looking for a dark horse, if someone's got to fill that role, I say why not Pitt?
Why not Pitt?
Why not?
I'll tell you why not Pitt. No, I'll go ahead and give you. I'll give a little credence to Pitt here. They do return their 5th-year starter Kenny Pickett. Mm-hmm. He threw for 2,300 yards last year, 13 touchdowns.
Yep.
So a lot of yards, not a lot of touchdowns. However, he did couple that with 9 picks. So not exactly what you want out of your quarterback position. But maybe he turns that corner. He takes care of the football. Maybe that's how Pitt gets there.
Hey, 3 of his linemen are also returning. Maybe a little bit of chemistry there. Maybe.
My dark horse, though, is Boston College.
Oh, cool.
Now, this is a team that is picked near the bottom in most of your previews and most of all of that. But let me give you some notes here. Jeff Hafley took over last year and really did a lot in his first year to turn that program around. So that's the former defense coordinator for Ohio State. So he took their defense and they jumped 50 spots in total defense in 1 year. Now, I know, again, there's some COVID issues there. Maybe that plays a part. But the offense coordinator he brought in, which is interesting to see because, you have a lot of guys that we've seen, especially at Tennessee, where you get guys that come in and they bring in, an OC and they don't let him do his job. He seems to have let them do the job. So this is a guy who took over a team that was very run happy. This is a Boston College team that really relied on the run. and he decided that, you know what, we'll take the growing pains. We're going to implement our air raid system year one. And he took the second worst offense in passing offense to the third best in the ACC. They returned their starting quarterback, their top wideout. He does lose his tight end that he relied on a lot last year. But let's see if he can take another step, and maybe they're the ones that sneak up and nip Clemson in the hills.
Any team that did not just say, let's use this season, going into last year's season, knowing that everything was going to be so impacted by COVID, and said, let's just do some crazy stuff to see what works. Any team that didn't have the foresight to do that should have an entire staff turnover, unless you're already in a position where you're winning, games and playing for championships and stuff. Because every single person, no matter what the conference is, will look back and say, oh yeah, but that was the COVID year. That doesn't really count. Anyway, that's beside the point. That's a little bit of free tidbit. All right, Heisman contenders. Give me your Heisman contenders.
I will give you my first one.
Okay.
I will leave DJ Ucla for you.
No, you take him if you want. That's fine.
No, he's all yours. I'm going to go Sam Howell.
Okay, cool.
So Sam Howell is the quarterback of North Carolina.
Yep.
Last year, he threw for 3,586 yards. He was 237 of 334. Not afraid to turn the ball loose. He threw for 30 touchdowns and 7 interceptions.
I think 34 touchdowns.
Is that right? I'm wrong.
That's what I have written down.
That's back-to-back years with over 3,000 yards and over 30 touchdowns. So a guy that's really consistently put it together. He had his breakout year 2 years ago, and everybody was kind of like, well, one-hit wonder. Let's see what he does. I don't buy it. But he backed it up. And in a year, he had 2 less games last year, and he still threw for very similar statistics there. He's got he lost his 2 running backs, but they brought in some transfers, one from Tennessee. They look like they're poised to maybe take that next step, and I hope it happens. So I hope Sam Howell gets there. Mac Brown's got some things rolling in Chapel Hill.
Now, talking about Sam Howell and Mac Brown real quick before I go on to my next one. Mac Brown was able to flip Sam Howell his first year coming to UNC. So he's kind of been his guy from the start. Do you know where Sam Howell was originally committed to?
I do not.
Florida State. Flipped him from Florida State. He came with Mac. So one other thing I like about him is that he has kind of been molded from day one under Mac's kind of wing. And, okay, he might not be the, I'll mention this maybe again here in a little bit, but he might not be like the Vince Young material, but, Mac Brown is not a bad person to have kind of coaching you up from day one on campus. So, yeah, you mentioned him, saving him for me. You're so sweet, but I'm going to hand him right back to you because I'm going to go to, is it Derek King? How do you say his first name? De'Eric. That's more simple than I try to make it. He's the quarterback at Miami. He had nearly 2,700 passing yards plus 538 rushing yards, 27 total touchdowns last year in the abbreviated COVID season. So I think he's coming off of a big injury against Oklahoma State in their bowl game. So obviously there's a little bit of concern about will he bounce back as good as he was. But if he does, then not only do you have him putting up, numbers that are worthy of consideration, but you also do it on the heels of a very heartwarming and encouraging story. And by golly, I can already see the sepia tone flashback pictures from his childhood and all that ESPN will put up, in every game that I have to watch with him in it, and talk about his perseverance and him on crutches and writhing in pain in the bowl game to throwing a touchdown or whatever. So it makes for a good story. It makes for a good thing. So I could see him getting some Heisman love if he's able to keep doing what he's been doing.
Absolutely. It's a guy that I was intrigued by. I thought he was going to really break out last year. Just didn't really happen. I know he picked up the injury, but was unimpressed in what I saw before that. Maybe he turns that corner and takes that next step. The other Heisman contender, I think probably the favorite right now, at least out of this conference, DJ Ucla, the quarterback for Clemson. In a bridge time last year as Trevor Lawrence's backup, he was 78 of 117, 914 yards, 5 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. This is a big guy. I think he's 6'6", 6'5". Got all the arm talent in the world. Interestingly enough, if you watched Quarterback 1 or QB1 on Netflix, He makes an appearance in season 3 by accident. So they are following a commit that is going to Iowa State, and DJ is his backup and actually beats him out for the starting job while he's there. Obviously, a little tougher to beat out Trevor Lawrence, but it's his now. He's got the keys to the castle, and he's got plenty of weapons to work with. So I think he is poised to have a great year. And I think people got tired of hearing about Trevor Lawrence, so
A little bit of
maybe
fatigue there.
yeah, so maybe we're excited to have a new name there, have a new guy wearing the orange and purple, and who knows? Maybe Ucla gets it done.
You mentioned 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. Also mentioned that he rushed for 4 additional touchdowns. So accounted for 9 total touchdowns in that abbreviated season in backup, capacity. So, we'll be interested to see how that pans out for him. But I definitely think he is the favorite Heisman contender for that conference. All right. We know we've left you on pins and needles for the conference winner for the ACC. Stephen, what do you think it's going to be?
It's Clemson until someone proves otherwise. It's got to be. I mean, I know it's the cop out. It's the easy thing, but this is a team that has won 7 straight ACC titles. It's a team that is just every year. I mean, it's like Alabama at this point. Every year, it doesn't matter who leaves. It doesn't matter what coordinator goes. They just keep on trucking, and I don't see that changing this year. Like I said, I think Ucla brings a different presence to the offense that Trevor Lawrence didn't.
Different vibe for sure. Yeah.
Not to say he's better. I'm not going to go that far.
Right.
But definitely a newness, a different, like you said, different vibe, different atmosphere going on. And I just think that they're going to roll. I would love to see Mac get it done. I mean, former Texas coach there, would love to see him break through at North Carolina. He's actually a local guy as well. He's from Cookeville, Tennessee.
Yep, for sure.
But Clemson is a favorite, not necessarily the favorite, but a favorite to win the college football playoff. There's a reason for that, and they should roll to their 7th straight title.
Yeah, not only have they won those last 6 titles, but over those last 6 years, they are 52-3 in ACC play. So no real reason to think that they're not going to get there. I know there's a lot of turnover, but they are, we've seen their quarterback be able to do some things. Obviously, like you said, he's no Trevor Lawrence, but let's just wait and see because he's going to be special, I think. And then they even are replacing their running back core with some 5-star studs that are just going to look like they're going to come and not miss a step either. So we'll see what they do, but no reason to think that they're just going to fall apart until they do. And so let's see what happens. But like you said, let's give a little love to North Carolina and the Fighting Mac Browns.
Hope they get there, man. That would be awesome. Go ahead.
The last time that they played Clemson, it was just a 1-point game. It was a 20-21 final, so they were kind of right there in it. And as I mentioned earlier, Sam Howell might not be Vince Young-esque, but if he can do something heroic, then, maybe they pull off the upset.
It's possible. I got a question for you.
Yep.
So I told you Clemson's won 6 straight.
Okay.
Their record, or the points in those games, Clemson has outscored their opponent 263-112. That goes back the last 6 years. Over the last, 4 years, can you guess what that number is? Can you guess how many points they've given up in the last 4 national championship games? Or ACC championship games?
ACC championship games.
Total
points, 28.
40. 176-40.
Wow.
This is just, like I said, a well-oiled machine, a conference that's just not very good outside of them. And truly, I mean, we would be talking about the ACC in a completely different tone if Clemson is not there. We like to bash the Pac12, but not like the ACC has a lot to write home about. They kind of wave that Clemson banner.
Well, and interesting to note, I think most people, if you were talking and asking them about Clemson, they would mention Clemson's offense. But you're really pointing out, and Milldog pointed out in our chat as well, that their defense is top notch, and their defense can probably cover some multitude of the offense trying to figure things out under a new play caller. So we'll see. It's definitely their conference to lose. All right, I have one interesting note about the PAC or the ACC rather. You might have more, but my interesting note is that the ACC is the only Power 5 conference not to have a coaching change this year.
That's interesting.
It's a fact. It could be interesting. It could not be. That's up to you to decide. Any interesting facts you have to share?
So since 2014, which was the college football playoff era, just to kind of further drive home our point that the ACC is not very good, Clemson has a win percentage of 899, nearly 90%. We'll just give them the .01. We'll give them 90%. Only two other schools in the conference have a win percentage above 60.
Wow.
Can you guess who those two teams are?
Two teams win percentage above 60%, not in that conference though, right?
They are in the conference. Two other
are?
ACC teams over 60%.
Okay. I'm going to
very low
say UNC.
Okay.
And I'm going to say Miami had some rough time. How many years is this over again?
It's 2014. Since the college football playoff came into existence.
Florida State.
You are 1 for 2. Florida State, a 621 win percentage.
Okay.
And Miami at .607. So right at 60%. That's it.
Wow.
3 teams in the ACC above 60%. In that time frame, Clemson has beat Florida State by an average of 24 points, and they have beat Miami for the last 3 times by an average of 39.3.
Wow.
Points per game. Not great in the ACC.
Yeah, I mean, hey, it's a struggling conference, so we've said that, and we'll see what they can do. Can they start making a name for themselves?
No.
All right, so that is our breakdown of 2 of the 5 Power 5 conferences. Throughout the next couple of weeks, we're going to spend some time looking at some of the other conferences, breaking down who we think are some of the key players, some of the key teams, who's going to win, and this will help you maybe get your head around what's going on in the season of college football. We have 2 more segments we want to go, and we have about 13 minutes to get them done, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on them. But one segment is one that we call Outside the Stadium. And this is a time where, I mentioned it last week, but we will look at something going on in the life of the athletic world, within the life of sports, but maybe isn't directly related to someone throwing the ball, catching the ball, hitting a home run, whatever the sport might be, right? Hitting the buzzer beater. It's maybe something bigger picture, so to speak. And then, of course, our last segment that we'll hit up is our Mount Rushmore. We're going to give you our top TV sitcoms. I want to hear your TV sitcoms. So if you're in the chat or you're listening later to the podcast, be sure to tweet us or write us in the chat and let us know what those are. But what I want to focus on first is our Outside the Stadium. And I don't want to get overly political today. I don't want to get overly into it, other than just maybe pointing out a little bit of the interesting potential kind of hypocrisy that we see in some different things here. But I want to talk about the NFL's COVID policy and what they are kind of doing with this. So I've got the website pulled up from NFL.com that was really talking about this new policy that came out. This was from July 22nd, and it was when the NFL informed clubs that COVID-19 outbreak among unvaccinated players could lead to forfeited games. Now, that link's there. You can go and read the article. We'll make sure it's in the show notes and all of that fun stuff. But here are a couple of the interesting things that I've read and found in this article. Here's one quote. If a game cannot be rescheduled during the 18-week schedule due to a COVID-19 outbreak among unvaccinated players, the team with the outbreak will forfeit and be credited with a loss. Okay, another quote from the article, Stephen. Players on both teams will not be paid for the lost contest, and the team responsible for the canceled games due to unvaccinated players will cover the financial losses and be subject to potential discipline from the commissioner's office.
Wow.
Okay, so there was a certain phrase or a certain key word in both of those little rules things that stood out to me. Did you catch that same word?
Was it unvaccinated?
It was. It was unvaccinated. And this, I think, is an interesting thing. Because if the NFL came out and said, hey, listen, we are a probably billion, but definitely a multi-million-dollar organization. putting out a product each week, and we have decided that our season is going to last for these number of weeks. And so if there are issues with COVID, there's a chance that we're just going to forfeit the game. No one's going to get the win. No one's going to get the loss. It just won't get made up, and you'll have to deal with the repercussions of where those fall, yada, yada, yada. They didn't say that, though. They said if this happens due to an unvaccinated player outbreak, then you don't get to reschedule your game. And if it's due to an unvaccinated player outbreak, then your team has to pay the other team for the lost wages and the lost merchandising and the lost this and the lost that. Here's my question.
So that's interesting. So if
it's a vaccinated player outbreak, will they make these concessions?
It sounds like if it's just an unvaccinated ordeal. So here's the thing. So if an unvaccinated outbreak happens, and for whoever, the Titans, the local team, and they're due to play, the Packers with Aaron Rodgers or somebody like that, the unvaccinated players are responsible for all salaries, or the teams are responsible for all salaries?
It sounds like the team. Now, how the team wants to go about enforcing that is going to be another question.
Guessing that gets flipped right around.
And we get an excellent question from my friend Jen in chat. She says, how will they know it's an unvaccinated player outbreak? And I think that might be my biggest problem, Jen. I'm glad you brought that up, because you probably won't know, because there are probably going to be both vaccinated and unvaccinated players that will eventually test positive. So what's then going to happen is they're going to say, this is those people's fault that they didn't have the vaccine. And you know what? Again, I'm not going to get political. I'm not going to get anything like that. I will say this. Am I pro COVID vaccine? Yes, I got it the first day that I was eligible to get it. And I think everyone should probably talk to their trusted medical provider, their trusted doctor, and find out what's best for them. But here's the thing. Jen's hitting it perfectly in the chat, is people with the vaccine are still going to get it. I've got some friends right now that have had the vaccine since day one that they could get it, that just got back from a camp they're at, and they have COVID now. And they take more precautions than just about anyone I know. So it's possible. And so what's going to happen is if, Team A has a COVID outbreak, and only the punter is the unvaccinated player on that team, they're going to be like, it's this one guy's fault, right? Whether it's one unvaccinated player or 100, but they're going to put the blame on that. And what I don't like them doing is they are, in essence, politicizing this, or they are, they're not having a spine. Because here's another thing that they say in this release. It says the league has insisted that it will not mandate vaccination, but the restrictions in place for non-vaccinated players and potential penalties to team make the NFL's statements clear. I'm sorry, that's commentary from the NFL article on it, not actually in their statement. So they're not actually going to come out with a statement saying you have to get a vaccine. We're just going to say, oh, by the way, if you don't, the world's going to come crashing down on your team, and everyone's going to get to point their fingers at you. We're going to try to guilt you into it. Well, that's spineless. That's absolutely spineless at that point. Make a decision, NFL, to either say we're going to mandate it or we're not going to mandate it, but don't come out with these really kind of pathetic things. So, so it's the NFL attempting to mandate vaccines without mandating them. I think they need to grow a spine and do it or don't do it. But one interesting fact about this is that there are several NFL players who are saying we're not going to get the vaccine. We are young, very healthy, very athletic people, and we feel like that we don't want this vaccine, and we're not going to get it. And we see that in none other than someone like Ravens quarterback Lamar Jackson, who got over not his first bout with COVID-19, but just finished getting over his second bout of COVID-19. And in the thousands of questions that were thrown his way at the team media meeting today was, are you going to get the vaccine now? And he was very kind about it, and he's just, very respectful, and just said, that's a decision that I have to make, and I haven't made it yet. And here's what I'm thinking. If this guy who's gotten it twice now, who says, I'm not worried about the long-term consequences of this, it's a decision I have to make. I don't know. I just don't know what the NFL's doing here. But it feels like that they are trying to guilt people, and they're trying to pass the buck and say, if the NFL's canceled this year, it's your fault. when you're the multi-million-dollar organization, mandate it or don't, but don't pass the blame like that.
I think time and again we've seen the NFL drop the ball in all of these situations. They handle nearly every major issue that comes up poorly. And the NBA, on the flip side, you may not agree with everything that the NBA does or how they react to everything, but they act with, in my opinion, the interest of those involved. And there are times for sure where we see the NBA turn a blind eye, as you've seen with the Hong Kong issues with Daryl Morey and all that. We touched on that back when it happened 2 years ago. Not to rehash that, but for the most part, the NBA seems to, perpetually get these right, and the NFL seems to perpetually get these wrong. I just can't fathom why they don't communicate. We see the NBA get positive publicity all the time. You would think the NFL would want a piece of that, but maybe it's just the difference in fans. But I have to agree. I think this is a mistake that the NFL is making. We'll see how it plays out. Hopefully, it works out. Hopefully, we don't have any issues. I mean, that's obviously the hope, is that everything goes off without any kind of kinks, and we have a full and healthy season. But that just doesn't seem likely, and it seems naive to put these policies in place.
It's definitely, COVID's a real thing. We're still seeing people get sick from it. We hope everyone stays healthy. We hope that the teams will put things in place. I mean, here's what I would rather the NFL do. I'd rather them say, this is a real threat. People are getting sick, and even people who are healthy at times are getting very sick. And so we want our organizations to do everything that they can to stay healthy. We encourage our players to get vaccines, but we also are going to mandate that, here are the tracing that you do, and here are the sanitation rules that you should follow, and here's what the CDC says about, cleaning things up. And I just wish they would, as opposed to, and maybe they do that already, right? And maybe that's not in the new press release we're just getting. But I just feel like instead of saying, well, when you guys cancel football, we're going to get a pointer fingers at you, and you're going to have to pony up and pay for it, they would say, this is a real threat. Here are the ways to combat it. Let's all work together to do it, as opposed to, just kind of passing the blame, passing the buck, and all that. So that's that. That's kind of our outside the stadium look this week. I think COVID in every sports, but especially college football and the NFL, I'm going to be interested to see how that plays out this year, what kind of impacting it has on scheduling. And also, here's what I want to know too, is does the NFL back down on this memo that they sent out? Because I guarantee, if Jen's Raiders have to cancel a game, the NFL doesn't care. But you get Brady's Tampa Bay, or you get some of these lovely teams that the NFL wants eyes on having to cancel games. I bet they suddenly ease some of these restrictions.
Like everything, it's all going to come back down to that bottom line. If the influx of money is affected, that's the only real way anything is going to change here. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out.
All right, Steven, it's time.
Let's do it.
It's time, my friends, for our favorite segment of the show, our last segment of the show. It's time for Mount Rushmore. That's right, Mount Rushmore is a time where we look at some of the greatest. Who would make the Mount Rushmore of different things? Tonight we're talking about sitcoms. Who, or what sitcoms rather, would make the list of our all-time favorites? All right, Steven. I let us off last week, so I'm going to give you the honor to go first this week. Let's see how you've ruined sitcoms.
Should I go 4-1, or should I give honorable mentions? Or do honorable mentions last? I'll do 4-1. I'll do 4-1. Number 4, it is a new one. It's a show that I've fallen in love with quickly. Wait to see the longevity, because I think longevity plays a factor in where a sitcom should be ranked, personally. Right. But number 4 is Ted Lasso. Okay. Don't know if you're on board with it yet.
I don't have Apple TV, so I've not seen it, but I'm familiar with the premise. I believe it started off as a TV commercial.
Yes. So NBC Sports several years ago ran a little bit with Jason Sudeikis, where he is an American football coach, and he goes over to take over a Premier League soccer team. And it was a huge hit. They actually did it back-to-back years. So there's 2 commercials out there. Go look those up to get a starting point for sure. But then they've turned this into a full-blown show, and Sudeikis is just incredible. I like him anyways, but he's fantastic in the show. We've mentioned I played soccer my whole life, and so I'm able to kind of harp on that as well. It pulls on those strings, but it's a hilarious show. Lots of language for those of you with kiddos that maybe don't want them to hear that. It is based in Britain, so you get the British commentary, if you know what I mean. So lots of language, but it's a hilarious show. Very good. Recommend it highly. It's worth at least the free trial of Apple TV. We're on the second season, so we'll see how long it lasts. Number 3, I have Parks and Rec. This was 2 when we did it the last time, I believe, but it's been dropped a spot. Great show. Love Chris Pratt. Love the characters. But it's been replaced at 2 by Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Okay.
I love Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I know a lot of people don't like Andy Samberg, but even if you don't like Samberg, the show has other qualities that you would enjoy. So I'd highly recommend it, even for those of you that are anti-Samberg. But Brooklyn Nine-Nine is fantastic, and the number 1 is The Office. I mentioned longevity. It's a classic. It has a good storyline. It has the comedy. It just really hits all of the major points to be a good sitcom. So it still holds the throne for now, but I reserve the right to move Ted Lasso up my board.
All right. Interesting. And honorable mentions.
New Girl and How I
Okay.
Met Your Mother. I don't think I had seen all of How I Met Your Mother when we did this list last time.
Okay.
But How I Met Your Mother is it's very good. Really enjoy it.
Okay.
Another one of those longer shows, but it just doesn't quite sneak into the top 4.
All right. Very good. Very good. So we have some similarities on our list, a lot of differences as well, though. We'll start with my number 4, which also was on your honorable mention. It's How I Met Your Mother. It does stay on Mount Rushmore for me, mostly because now, I will say it's probably not as good for like a rewatch, but just watching that show like for the first time, and I watched it a lot when it was like on the air. Just some great characters. I've always said you remind me a little bit of Ted Mosby, the main character in that show. I don't know, like some of your mannerisms or like your facial expressions. I don't know what it is. Not like you as a person. You're like Ted's a whiny loser, and you're not that all the time. But no, there's just like
I'm married at 26.
That's true. So. That's true. I don't know. There's just like I don't know. Maybe you make a face that he makes or something, but I've always just kind of thought that. So that makes number 4 for me.
Apologize.
You're not. Sorry. Number 3 is Scrubs. I love the show Scrubs. Ooh. I watched that when it was on TV as well, and just always cracked up. Now, interesting tidbit about Scrubs and one of your shows, Ted Lasso, created by the same person. Bill Lawrence is creator of both of those shows. So I always said that Scrubs was kind of like the live action version of Family Guy, because we just like cut away to those like dumb skits all the time that like Family Guy does. So so anyway, I like that. And then some similarities here. I have Parks and Rec at number 2. It's just funny. It's one of those shows that gets better, especially in those middle seasons, like 2 through like maybe the next to last season are just some of the best. Last season's still good, but some of those seasons are just great, especially when you introduce some of the new characters. Just hilarious. One of those ones that you can just go back and watch anytime. And then I also have The Office at number 1. I will say this, though. There are probably some of these other shows that I would rather go back and rewatch some than The Office. But in fairness, that's probably just because I've seen The Office so many times, and a few of them I've only seen once. So a rewatch is worth going and doing. But it is just our generation's classic, and I love how new generations are picking it up. Not to Netflix anymore because I don't think it's on Netflix anymore, but due to some of the other streamings. Couple of honorable mentions from the chat. Jen mentioned MASH. It is worth mentioning just because it was like the most watched finale of like all time, and that's saying something for its time. Community got a shout out from Milldog in the chat. That's a good one.
My brother's big on Community. I haven't given it a shot yet.
I've not watched it either. That's why it's not on my list. That's the same reason Brooklyn Nine-Nine's not on my list. I've only seen like the first season and a half, just because I'm so busy doing other stuff. I haven't had time to watch it, but I do really enjoy what I've seen of it. It is very funny, and I've had a lot of friends send me like YouTube clips or like TikToks from different parts that I've not seen yet, and they're really funny. So I do think it's a funny show.
The cold openings in Brooklyn Nine-Nine rival those of Parks and Rec and The Office.
For sure. Another honorable mention that made my list was the show Roseanne. I think I liked that one growing up as a young boy because for the first time I was watching a TV family that more likely represented mine, fairly imperfect and chaotic and a mess, as opposed to like the Leave It to Beaver and Happy Day family that was on TV a lot of times. Golden Girls makes my honorable mention list as well.
Okay.
Love Golden Girls. We're watching that while we fall asleep at night again, and I will literally just sit there and watch those and crack up at Sophia and the other characters. And then my final honorable mention, laugh at me if you want, Bluey, the Australian cartoon that's on Disney Plus, is making my honorable mention sitcom. 7-minute episodes. It's about 104 episodes out right now. But it is just funny. It's family quality stuff. I love it. What can I say? All right, Steven, do you have a last word for us?
No, I think How I Met Your Mother gets docked for me because I get really annoyed toward the end of not knowing. It just drags on too long, not knowing who the person is. I think that gets me.
The whole last season of How I Met Your Mother almost drops it off my list. In fact, I just really don't watch it anymore.
Yeah, Scrubs, same way. Scrubs is great. If they had cut it where they should have cut it,
I've never
Scrubs
seen the
is
last
so
season of Scrubs. Yeah, I just don't
don't
know
do
it
it.
exists. Yeah,
just accept the fact that it ended where it did for you and be happy.
100%. All right, any other final words before we cut this out?
No, tune in next week for the Big Ten, I believe.
Big Ten, sounds good.
I'll confirm that this week. But.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming and being a part of Season 3, Episode 2 of the Sports Corner podcast. Tonight we broke down the Pac12 and the ACC, and we want to thank all of you who came and joined us live on Twitch and were a part of our great chat and this great community. Really are glad that you guys were here to be a part of that. If you are catching us in another place, well, thank you so much for that as well. We are on YouTube as well as your favorite podcast app. If you leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, we will read it live on the air. So go ahead and give us that 5-star review, say whatever you want, and we will read it on the next episode. Until then, I hope you have a wonderful day. We'll catch you live next Monday or in your ears following Tuesday on. And I am Nick. I've been joined by Steven, and this has been the Sports Corner Podcast.